Good evening, everyone. Welcome you all to Oncology Classroom evening session. This evening, we are going to have a very interesting talk on prophylactic cranial irradiation in lung cancer and current controversies. This lecture will be delivered by Dr. Shikha Goel. Dr. Goel is an assistant professor in the Department of Radiation Oncology at prestigious PGI MER, Chandigarh. Dr. Goel is very well known for her academic excellence, and she is one of the beautiful teachers. We are very thankful to have you, Dr. Goel, today evening with us, and we must sincerely thank you for being with us and accepting this invitation. May I now request you to please take over the session and start your presentation. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Dodul, for this kind introduction. I'll straight away start since we are already 5 minutes into the assigned time. So my mandate includes...
Can you please... yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. So my mandate includes prophylactic cranial irradiation in lung cancer and current controversies. I will stick to this topic, although we all understand that prophylactic cranial irradiation started with leukemias and lymphomas, and later on it was translated into lung cancer because of the gain in brain metastasis control. So over the last 30 years, several publications have come. Every time some data came, there was probably a sense that new controversies have arisen or some controversies have been sorted out. So every few years we get an article which deals with some issues on controversies. So small cell lung cancers, we all know only 25% present with limited stage and the rest have extensive stage. The complete responses with limited stage are very good to the tune of 80%, but they have a median survival of almost 1.5 years, but a very dismal 5-year overall survival, only up to 15%. With extensive stage, the complete response rates are much lower. The median survival is only to the tune of 7 months, and 5-year survival is only 2%. So any gain that we are seeing in these diseases, even if it's a brilliant therapy with very good outcomes, the gain in absolute terms will never be more than a couple of months. And we have to admit that we do get excited about these smaller gains also. So 10% of small cell lung cancers have brain metastasis at diagnosis. And with respect to extracranial lesions, brain metastasis respond poorly to systemic therapy. Certain data have shown that nearly a third of brain metastasis respond, whereas 3/4 of extracranial lesions respond when the same systemic therapy is given. This data of 10% brain metastasis came from CT series. In the new MRI series, we see that the proportion of brain metastasis is much higher at about 25%. And even after chemoradiation in limited stage, when you see CR, complete response, there may be 33% asymptomatic brain metastasis. We also know that several CNS paraneoplastic syndromes are also associated with small cell lung cancers, even in the absence of brain metastasis. So we are all aware of the blood-brain barrier and the brain CSF and blood CSF barriers. These are the barriers which lead to these poor responses to systemic therapy in the brain. And that is why there is a need to add on a therapy specifically targeted to the CNS disease so that we can control that better. So initial use was empirical. Data in the 70s showed that ALL patients who received extensive systemic therapy had a high incidence of brain relapses, more than 50%, and use of prophylactic cranial irradiation to the tune of 20-25 gray in these patients helped reduce this incidence to about 10% or so. So encouraged with this data, PCI was started in small cell lung cancers also because they also have a high propensity for brain metastasis. And brain being a sanctuary site, because of the blood-brain barrier, there is a lower response to systemic therapy. There are a couple of hypotheses which deal with this higher incidence of brain metastasis and the role of PCI. It is said that PCI can eliminate subclinical disease in the brain and thus reduce the possibility of symptomatic brain metastasis and possibly also improves overall survival. So if we have a therapy which takes care of this subclinical disease, which has penetration into the brain across the blood-brain barrier, and which has good efficacy in brain, or if there are better surveillance strategies and good salvage, even if you detect asymptomatic early metastasis, we may not need PCI. The second hypothesis is that there may be a change in the CNS microenvironment itself. So the brain becomes a less receptive soil for seeding from extracranial disease. This hypothesis over time has not really been shown to be true, because patients who have large residual extracranial disease, even with PCI, they do poorly. The chances of brain metastasis in these patients do not really decrease considerably. So first, it was proposed as a solution to overcome the presumed chemotherapy failures within the brain and the high incidence of brain metastasis after a publication by Hansen in 1973. And over 1980s, it was included in standard regimes for limited stage disease at least. And the 2-year probability of developing brain metastasis in these patients, it came down from as high as 58% to only 11%. This was seen in a retrospective study. So over time, as Dr. Dodul already mentioned, several questions have come up. The application of PCI in small cell lung cancer is not so straightforward. Now we question whether PCI should be given to all patients, whether there are any patients who are better candidates with respect to their age, performance status, presence of pre-existing neurologic deficit or their stage, or any patients because of these same criteria, they may be worse candidates. And what is the benefit are we expecting from this therapy? Is it only decrease in brain metastasis? Is it an increase in progression-free survival or an increase in overall survival? And is this benefit, whatever benefit we are expecting, is this benefit related to the response to initial therapy, whether it is chemoradiation in limited stage or systemic therapy with consolidative radiation in extensive stage? If it is to be given, when should it be given? What dose is effective? What modality should be used? And with the latest trials which are showing that addition of immunotherapy in extensive stage improves survivals, does the role of PCI still stand? We are fearful of neurocognitive deficits in whole brain radiation, even when given for brain metastasis, even in stage 4 situations. So does PCI cause neurocognitive impact? How much it is? And what tests should be used to address it? To reduce the neurocognitive impact in brain metastasis setting, hippocampal sparing, memantine, donazepam, these are the strategies that have been used. Do they have a role in PCI as well? And can we apply the results of old trials in the current setting when our staging is based on PET scan, where there may be a stage migration to extensive stage, and the CNS screening is also more commonly done with MRI, which has a better specificity and sensitivity than CT scan. And other dilemmas that I will deal with briefly are the role of PCI in non-small cell lung cancers, as well as in extrapulmonary small cell carcinomas. So the initial studies across 1970s and 80s, they addressed the role of PCI. There were some people who were willing to give it, some people who were not so willing to give it. So Rosen et al. Published a series where they took patients who were enrolled in 3 NCI protocols over these 10 years. And they enrolled patients in protocols who were mandated to receive PCI, others which were not receiving PCI in any situation, and some intermediate categories. And they saw that the development of CNS metastasis as well as response to PCI was dependent on the degree of response to systemic therapy. Patients who had a CR to systemic therapy, PCI added survival benefit to those. Patients who did not have a CR, PCI didn't really help them to increase survival, although brain metastasis incidence was definitely lower in PCI groups than in non-PCI groups. And in the non-PCI groups, in 17%, brain was the first and only site of relapse, whereas none of the PCI group patients developed any brain metastasis over the given follow-up period of 5 years or so in these studies. So the first and most important meta-analysis addressing the role of PCI in CR setting came in 1999 by Operin. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. They took 7 trials, addressed nearly 1,000 patients, compared these patients for the endpoint of overall survival. And this was taken for patients who had CR2 initial therapy. Nearly 85% patients had limited stage disease. Various schedules of radiotherapy were used, starting from 8 gray single fraction to 30 gray in 10 fractions, or even 40 gray in 20 fractions. So in this meta-analysis, although these 7 individual trials did not show a survival benefit independently, but when this meta-analysis was done, it was seen that in patients with small cell lung cancer who developed CR, if they are given PCI, they have an overall survival gain, which is 5.4% at 3 years. The incidence of brain metastasis was reduced by nearly 25%. And there was also a disease-free survival gain over the same period of 8.8%. So huge gain. And this was very encouraging. This is what changed the practice in favor of PCI in all patients who had a good response to systemic therapy initially. So it was also seen that higher dose, patients who received a higher dose had lesser brain metastasis, although this did not lead to an OS advantage. And patients who had early PCI, that is after initiation of chemo, did better than those who received PCI after 4 months of completing systemic therapy. There was another meta-analysis soon after this one, published in 2001. Instead of 7 trials, it took 12 randomized trials, nearly 1,500 patients. 5 of these trials addressed only limited stage disease. And there were some other factors also. Brain imaging was done more frequently, either with CT head or SPECT. And PCI was given at induction of chemotherapy in 5, whereas after completion of chemotherapy in 2. All of these studies, they showed that there was a reduction in the brain relapse, whether or not CR was there. So all studies as well as CR group had reduction in brain metastasis, but survival benefit was seen only in the group where CR had been attained. So this actually matched the results of the trial by the meta-analysis by Operin, but they did not adequately describe the long-term neurotoxicity. The third meta-analysis, which came only last year, it addressed even more patients of 7 trials. All of these trials were started in the 1990s. So there was a reduced brain metastasis rate confirming previous trial results. There was an overall survival benefit, but here it was seen across all stages, although the benefit was higher for limited stage rather than extensive stage. And the benefit was there for any response to chemotherapy. With respect to this endpoint, there was a lot of heterogeneity, so the authors were not very certain of this finding or this result. So they also had one more observation that had not been reported in the earlier meta-analysis. So if these patients had a post-systemic therapy imaging and there were no brain metastasis seen on that imaging, these patients did not have an overall survival benefit. So patients who have clear brain imaging after completion of their induction therapy did not have overall survival gain. So significant effect on decreasing brain metastasis, but little OS benefit in this specific small subgroup of patients. So apart from these meta-analysis, there are a few pooled analyses and retrospective studies which have been reported in the past decade. They have also confirmed the impact of PCI. Some have reported overall survival advantage, every study has reported reduction in brain metastasis. And the most common PCI doses that have been used in these trials are either 30 grain 15 fractions or 25 grain 10 fractions. So we see that PCI in this pooled analysis had a better overall survival benefit. The benefit as seen in the previous meta-analysis was more for limited stage than extensive stage. For limited stage, 25 in 10 gave a better OS than 13-15. But PCI also had more grade 3 adverse events. Most of these events were limited to acute events such as alopecia and lethargy, and these trials also did not address the neurocognitive impact much. And there's a huge retrospective SEER database analysis, nearly 8,000 patients. This is the largest number of patients that have been studied in one go. So the median follow-up was about 13 months. There was an overall survival gain at 5 years of 8% and cause-specific survival gain of 9% over this cohort of 8,000 patients. And the hazard ratio for disease-specific mortality without PCI was 1.13. That is, patients who did not receive PCI were at a 13% higher risk of death due to disease. This EORTC trial was included in the meta-analysis that have been reported earlier. I just wanted to focus on one thing. We see that the gain in reducing brain metastasis is much higher with PCI compared to no PCI. But when you compare different dose groups, that same gain may not be maintained across all the dose groups. So to summarize the findings from these meta-analysis and large series, we know that there's a definite reduction in symptomatic brain metastasis incidence, although no single trial demonstrated overall survival advantage, but meta-analysis and retrospective data have shown OS advantage, especially in patients who had a complete response. There is a heterogeneity in results with respect to stage, response to chemoradiation, whether you should consider only CRs or whether any response is also okay, and the timing of PCI. So in the pre-MRI era trials, the presence or absence of CT staging did not have a huge impact on results. Only when MRI was used to analyze the presence or absence did the results change. I will be discussing that subsequently. So in these MRI series, if brain metastases were absent before PCI, overall survival gain was not seen. But neuropsychological effects the reporting is largely inadequate. I already discussed that patients with 25 grain 10 fractions did better than those who received 30 grain 15 fractions. That was a meta-analysis finding. But even on those modeling studies, it has been seen that if you see the timing of PCI, whether it is given within 60 days or after 60 days of induction therapy, the probability of eliminating brain metastasis is higher in the higher dose range if it is given at 2 gray per fraction. But early PCI has a better control rate in the brain. If we look at the two charts in the right panel, we see that to gain an 80% control in the brain with respect to brain metastasis, you need a dose of nearly 30 gray if you give early PCI. Whereas to achieve the same kind of control when you are giving late PCI, even doses of 40 gray may not be sufficient. So you should start early so that lesser dose is sufficient to control brain metastasis incidence. So there was an intergroup trial conducted across 4 groups. It was a phase 3 trial which addressed this dilemma of what doses should be used, especially in limited stage small cell lung cancer with CR after initial therapy. So they compared 25 grain 10 fractions, which was the most encouraging finding in the previous studies. And they compared this with either a schedule of 36 grain 18 fractions or 24 gray in 16 fractions given twice daily. This trial included a large number of patients, more than 700 patients, and the primary endpoint was not survival. it was the incidence of brain metastasis at 2 years. So they saw that with standard radiation dose, the standard is considered 25/10 or high dose PCI. The 2-year brain metastasis rates are similar, but in the high dose range, incidentally, the overall survival falls. So after this trial result, PCI was recommended with a dose fractionation of 25 grain 10 fractions as the standard, and this has been taken as the basic dose fractionation schedule for all future trials. There was an updated analysis published in 2011, which also showed that the higher dose arm, not only did it have a lower survival, it also had a higher chronic neurotoxicity. So 36 gray is a dose that should never be considered in the prophylactic settings. Coming to the risks with PCI, the acute effects may be hair loss and fatigue, as I discussed earlier, but it has to be used with caution in patients who are more than 70 years of age or patients who have comorbid conditions such as pre-existing cerebrovascular diseases. We know that PCI causes demyelination in young children when it is given in ALL studies. But even in elderly patients or if in adult patients, if PCI is given concurrently with chemotherapy, given at higher doses or higher dose per fraction, it has shown higher neurotoxicity over a period of study of 6 months to 2 years. This is an analysis of patients who were treated with whole brain radiation or SRS. This is not the PCI group. This is taken from patients who received radiation for brain metastasis. So at baseline, this light gray color shows normal intensity of white matter, whereas this black color shows diffuse white matter hyperintensity, which results from radiation to the brain. So at baseline, both patients who received radiation to whole brain and control patients who were actually receiving radiation to the breast, they were similar with respect to the brain changes. After 1 year of follow-up after receiving whole brain radiation, the proportion of patients who developed class 3 changes, diffuse hyperintensity, increased, and this further increased at 2 years follow-up. So there are visible changes in the brain for sure when you give whole brain radiation. There have been formal attempts to quantify the cognitive impact of PCI. There was a pooled analysis of 2 RTOG trials, and they performed both cognitive testing as well as patient-reported cognitive function testing at 6 months and 1 year. And they saw that higher dose of PCI and PCI given at an advanced age led to greater cognitive and quality of life decline. They tested cognitive testing was done with HVLT recall test and HVLT delayed recall tests. So the difference is huge. If at 6 months, percentage of patients with decline from baseline were only 12% in the non-PCI arm, they were nearly 24% in the PCI arm. And this difference was more or less constant across future follow-up as well. This was a prospective study which showed that there was, even if groups were similar at baseline, after 6 to 8 weeks of completing PCI, lower verbal memory was there in the PCI group, and nearly half the patients had decline in their verbal memory over the follow-up period. And there was a much higher rate of CNS demyelination in this group, which happened months to years after completing PCI. But there is a problem with neurocognitive assessments. There are studies which have done only mini mental state evaluations. There are studies who've done a single test, and there are studies which have taken only patient-reported outcomes. And we still don't know what is the best test to do. Maybe a combination of these tests is the most appropriate, but there are many confounding factors. Patients who are taken up for treatment at an advanced age or in the presence of several comorbid conditions or are already on anti-epileptic agents, they will have a poorer neurocognitive performance at the baseline even before PCI is given. It has been seen in previously reported studies that these small cell lung cancer patients have a higher baseline proportion of neurocognitive deficits, even if no radiation has been given compared to healthy controls. And these tests, as I said, are not standardized. And brain metastasis development may itself impact cognition and quality of life. So even if the overall survival gain is questionable, prevention of development of these brain metastases may be a worthwhile endeavor to preserve these neurocognitive functions. There are a few strategies that have been explored over the last 10 years or so to address this issue. You can better select patients who merit PCI or who will have a greater negative impact with PCI. Patients with poor performance status or a baseline neurocognitive decline, patients who are older than 70 years, they are poor candidates. As I said earlier, the survival gain is to the tune of 1 to 2 months. But if that survival is with a very poor quality of life, maybe it is better to withhold therapy in these situations. Hippocampal avoidance, memantine and donazepam, these have been seen with great interest in whole brain radiation studies in the presence of brain metastasis. This has been tested. I'll come to these individually. So this has been tested in the PCI setting in lung cancer as well. Apart from these, there is a line of view that thinks that instead of giving PCI across all patients, you monitor these patients, do an active MRI surveillance, and then offer early stereotactic radiosurgery for brain metastasis. There are a couple of phase 3 randomized trials which are testing this strategy of hippocampal avoidance in PCI. These are trials which are using IMRT to doses of 25 gray in 10 fractions. And the primary outcome here is neurocognitive decline. They are studying all stages of patients who have either remission or at least no progressive disease after chemoradiation. The Dutch trial here, it has reported its early results. They did not surprisingly notice any difference in neurocognition at 4 months and 8 months. Surprisingly, there was no difference between these two arms, even in brain metastasis incidence or overall survival over a median follow-up of 2 years. So it's difficult to interpret because this study did not even meet what has already been found so far in terms of brain metastasis and overall survival. The PRIMER trial, which is a Spanish trial, it started in March 2015 and it is still accruing patients. Radiosurgery is classically recommended for patients for diseases which have so-called radioresistance. So since small cell lung cancer is a radiosensitive disease, it falls out of the conventional indication for SRS. So most SRS data in small cell lung cancer is available from series where brain metastases have developed after PCI and these have been addressed with SRS, or patients who had brain metastases upfront received whole brain radiation as a therapeutic approach and they developed recurrences. Certain Japanese series have evaluated the approach of active surveillance. This also I will discuss in greater detail subsequently, but nearly 20% of patients who did not receive upfront PCI and were on active surveillance received radiosurgery as the first line therapy for brain metastasis. A retrospective series, the largest series that is available is by Ozawa from Japan again. They studied patients who had a limited stage disease with either a partial or complete response to initial therapy. Nearly 124 patients, some received PCI while others chose MRI surveillance with SRS for management if there were brain metastasis. And at 2 years, this approach showed similar OS and brain metastasis rates. So if you are doing active MRI surveillance, you may not really be doing a huge disservice to the patient if you're not offering PCI. This is one of the landmark trials which address the role of PCI in extensive stage disease. Till now, the data that is available for limited stage disease is mostly from meta-analysis. No huge randomized trials are there. But this trial, which was published in NEJM in 2007 by Ben Slotman, this recruited nearly 300 patients with a primary endpoint of time to symptomatic brain metastasis. Nearly 30% patients underwent preliminary brain imaging at the outset of treatment, and various PCI doses ranging from 20 gray to 30 gray were used with a biologically effective dose of 25 to 39 grays, and they started radiation 4 to 6 weeks after completing chemotherapy. So this trial showed a much higher control with respect to symptomatic brain metastasis. 1 year brain metastasis risk with PCI was only 14%, whereas without PCI it was as high as 40%. There was a higher median disease-free survival in the PCI group, but you can observe that this higher median DFS means a 2.5 week gain, not even a month. And there was a higher survival benefit with PCI. The median survival was 6.7 months in the PCI arm, whereas it was only 5.4 months in the non-PCI arm. Again, the difference is 1.3 months. But if you see 1 year overall survival, there was a twofold gain. Patients who did not receive PCI, there was a 1 year survival of 13.5%, whereas those who received PCI, there was a 1 year survival of 27%. When they assess the quality of life and symptoms are mostly acute, and fatigue and hair loss were the most common symptoms. With respect to quality of life, there was not much difference in the PCI and non-PCI arm. So the tolerance in the short to long term was fairly good, even with PCI. So this trial actually helped to change the practice, consolidate the practice for PCI even in extensive stage disease. The authors reanalyzed their results after exclusion of early CNS failures, that is failures which happened within 2 months, and the OS benefit was maintained. But there is a lot of criticism of this trial. This trial did not mandate any brain imaging before or after chemotherapy. And whenever imaging was done, there was a choice of CT or MRI. Most of these patients underwent CT scan only. And there was no routine imaging for follow-up. Even after completion of systemic therapy, imaging was done only for patients who had symptoms. And there is a lot of uncertainty because of this factor regarding the proportion of patients who may have had asymptomatic brain metastasis at the time of receiving PCI. We know that CT studies have shown brain metastasis incidence of only 10%, whereas MRI studies have shown it to be 25%. So nearly 15% patients would be missed if you are not doing MRI before doing PCI. There was another trial which was reported 10 years after Ben Slotman's trial. This was a Japanese study which was phase 3 across 47 centers in Japan. They took patients who had any response to chemotherapy, no brain metastasis confirmed with MRI, and these patients were randomized to PCI of 25 grain 10 fractions. Remember that the previous trial used a variety of doses. So this trial had a constant dose schedule, and they had an MRI surveillance arm where they did regular MRIs every 3 months for the first year, and then at 18 months and 24 months. And unlike the previous trial, which had the time to developing brain metastasis as their endpoint, this trial had survival as their primary endpoint. So over this period, they saw that the brain metastasis incidence at 18 months was definitely lower in the patients who received PCI. It was 40% in the PCI arm versus 64% in the MRI surveillance arm. But the median overall survival was not different between these two arms. The median survival was actually a little higher in the surveillance arm compared to the PCI arm, although the difference was non-significant. And the difference in progression-free survival was also not there between these two arms. They also studied for neurocognition the mini-mental state examination scores, but these scores did not change over the assessment period of 2 years. Nearly 83% of patients in the surveillance arm eventually received radiotherapy for brain mets, but in the PCI arm, also nearly 46% patients did need radiation for brain mets. And this is the trial which I was referring to in the SRS series also. Here, the preferred modality of giving radiotherapy to brain was SRS, and median time to palliative radiotherapy was longer in the PCI arm and nearly half in the surveillance arm. So the surveillance arm also had a similar survival. They had more brain metastasis and they needed RT sooner. There were no treatment-related deaths here. The main critique of this trial is its long accrual period. So over 47 centers over 3 years, there was less than one patient accrued per center per year. And this showed a higher rate of brain metastasis in the surveillance arm than prior studies. So it is difficult to figure out whether this kind of behavior is related to the ethnicity because it was done only in the Japanese period, or are there some other factors also? So this is a direct comparison of EORTC and the Japanese studies. The EORTC study, as I said earlier, MRI was not a prerequisite, and some patients who may have had brain metastases which were asymptomatic may have been recruited in the PCI arm, and their improved survival in that arm may actually be a reflection of response of these brain metastases to radiation than prevention of development of brain metastases. So it has been said that both these trials dealt with extensive stage disease and PCI, but they were actually asking different questions. URTC trial was asking the question of whether reactive imaging for any neurologic symptoms in this situation, whether PCI gives a better survival. The Japanese trial, instead of reactive imaging, it did an active MRI surveillance. And in this situation, PCI was not giving us any overall survival advantage. Encouraged by this, there were a few investigators who went back and studied their data retrospectively. This is a large series of 400 patients with extensive stage disease. Here also they saw that the survival difference was there like the previous meta-analysis, which included both limited stage and extensive stage. But the median survival difference between the PCI and non-PCI arm was huge. They did not really match the findings of the Japanese trial. And the survival difference was irrespective of post-chemo brain imaging. Another retrospective study, but this time for limited stage disease, they studied the effect of MRI staging and PCI versus no PCI. The 3-year brain metastasis incidence was not, the difference was not significant. And in this group, they did not notice any overall survival difference if MRI staging was done. So if they presume that if there was a negative MRI at the outset and a negative MRI after completion of initial therapy, there is a lesser risk of brain metastasis, and the need for PCI for a survival gain may not be there. This is a recent meta-analysis published a couple of years back on extensive stage exclusively. Here also PCI did not show any overall survival benefit. There was a gain in progression-free survival. There was a definite reduction in brain metastasis here. So the issues with these data is that there is a lot of conflict between one trial to the other. The studies which are done in the pre-MRI era, they had their limitations, and they have a doubtful contemporary relevance because of the advances in the imaging techniques. So there is a need for modern trials which evaluate optimum CNS management. We need more prospective data for MRI surveillance, selection of patients for radiosurgery, as well as neurocognitive and quality of life assessments. And there is a need to assess risk versus benefit for each of these approaches. There is an ongoing study which is trying to address this thing. MRI is a standard in this study in both arms, and in one of the arms they have added PCI in addition to MRI surveillance. It started last year only, and MRI would be done every 3 months. PCI at the standard dose of 25 gray, including all stages. And this trial is very inclusive because it is trying to take into account all of the newer developments, including immunotherapy for extensive stage, consolidative thoracic radiotherapy for patients who have good response in extensive stage, hippocampal avoidance, use of memantine or any salvage therapies as well. So we should be looking forward to the results from this trial. Fortunately, because of the behavior and biologic outcomes of this disease, we get results within 3 or 4 years, unlike the prostate series where you have to wait for 15 to 20 years to get any tangible results. So based on whatever data is there, the different guidelines have different proposals. The first 3 guidelines came before 2017, that is when the Japanese trial was published recommending MRI surveillance. So these 3 guidelines from ESMO, ASCO, and American College of Chest Physicians, they still recommend PCI for both limited stage and extensive stage if there is a response to treatment. And the ASCO guideline recommends a dose for 25 in 10 fractions. The ASTRO and NCCN guidelines have come in this year. These guidelines recommend that you look at each patient not as a part of a cohort, but with their individual factors. If it is a CR or PR, you should re-stage with brain MRI. This is the ASTRO guideline. For stage 1, if MRI surveillance is available, PCI is not recommended. For patients who have stages 2 and 3, they are younger than 70 years with a good performance status and have had a good response to thoracic radiation, PCI is recommended. But patients with an elderly age or a performance status, comorbidities, a shared decision making needs to be done between the oncologists and the patient. And whenever it is offered, the dose is 25 in 10 fractions. For extensive stage, they said because the data from the Japanese trial encourages MRI surveillance, the decision should again be shared. The medical oncologist should consult the radiation oncologist as well as discuss the pros and cons with the patient, and then consider offering surveillance versus PCI. And both doses of 25 gray in 10 fractions and 20 in 5 are applicable. NCCN gives an option of MRI surveillance for extensive stage. For limited stage, it offers PCI to all patients unless they have a poor performance status, baseline neurocognitive dysfunction, or advanced age. So the last couple of years have seen 2 immunotherapy trials, one exploring addition of atezolizumab and the other one exploring the addition of durvalumab. Both of these trials gave a median survival benefit of 2 to 3 months over the standard therapy of cisplatin and etoposide. And in both these trials, only about 10% patients were offered PCI. And these did not really mandate PCI use in any circumstance. So we don't know whether PCI would help when patients are recruited or patients are treated based on the results of these trials. And at the moment, we don't know about the incidence of brain metastasis separate from the systemic metastasis. There is a retrospective study also which has shown that from the data of these trials over the last couple of years, the oncologists have started to use more first-line immunotherapies compared to chemotherapy alone. PCI use has nearly become half of what it was originally in 2013 to 2019, and only 7% patients who received first-line immunotherapy received PCI over this 6-year period. So each trial changes our thought process, it changes the practice that we may expose our patients to. Briefly discussing the role of PCI in non-small cell lung cancers. We know that non-squamous non-small cell lung cancers have a higher propensity for brain metastasis, and several factors including the T size and lymph node status determine this higher risk of brain metastasis. Even in post-op series where nodal dissection has been done and there is N2 status, if less than 30% nodes are involved, the risk is 30%, and if more than 30% lymph nodes are involved, the risk doubles to 60%. So these data suggested that non-squamous non-small cell lung cancer patients who have N2 or higher disease and more than 30% affected nodes, they may gain some benefit from PCI. But various trials that have been done in the last 20-25 years and the meta-analysis from these trials have failed to translate this into any meaningful benefit. There is a reduction in the risk of brain metastasis, which is significant, but the survival gain is not there. Rather, PCI in these given trials, it had a detrimental effect on overall survival with a hazard ratio of 1.19, which means a 19% higher risk of death in the PCI arm. And at the moment, the data which defines what optimum dose and what are the neurocognitive and QOL impacts, they are not available. Another meta-analysis that is reported just this year gives similar results, but OS was similar. It was not at least detrimental. Decrease in brain metastasis was confirmed. 2 studies also showed neurocognitive decline with delivery of PCI. So PCI is not recommended for non-small cell lung cancers at the moment. A brief word on extrapulmonary small cell carcinomas. They are a small proportion of small cell carcinomas, less than 5%. And because of their rarity, they are managed according to small cell lung cancer protocols only. Common sites are esophagus, cervix, bladder, and prostate, and some head and neck. The brain metastasis incidence here is lower compared to the lung primaries. They have a poorer overall prognosis and a higher incidence of metastasis to other sites. Particularly prostate and head and neck small cell cancers have a higher propensity for brain metastasis, but there are no data to support the role of PCI even in these situations, because we don't know whether PCI will reduce brain metastasis or whether it will have any survival impact. So it is left to individual discretion. It actually depends on your experience. If you have seen 2 patients with prostate small cell carcinomas, one of them brain metastasis, for your third patient, you will be inclined to offer PCI. If you have seen just 1 patient who was okay, who did not have at least brain metastasis, you may not offer PCI to your next patient. So it is actually left to individual decision, but there is no uniform recommendation. So the how-to of PCI, how do you plan PCI? The standard PCI for leukemias, it actually covers the subarachnoid space, and it also covers the meningeal reflections. In small cell lung cancer, we are more concerned about the brain parenchyma. So you don't have to worry about the meningeal reflections too much. You essentially plan it like you plan palliative whole brain radiotherapy for pre-existing brain metastasis. It can be done with collimated parallel opposed fields or German helmet technique. If you are considering hippocampal avoidance, you may need to use modern technologies such as IMRT, VMAT, or helical tomotherapy. And although different studies have used different constraints, but if you are able to achieve a Dmax less than 15 gray in the hippocampus and a mean dose less than 9 gray, you should be okay. There is a report also for places which are not able to offer IMRT. There is a technique where you can draw and shield the hippocampus with MLC. The coverage will be slightly lesser. Instead of 95%, you have to accept a lower coverage of 82%, but the hippocampal sparing is good. So to summarize, there are only a few non-controversial points. PCI definitely has a high potential to reduce brain metastasis, and whenever it is indicated, a dose of 25 gray in 10 fractions should be used, especially in limited stage disease. Timing should be early after completion of local or systemic therapy. Delays beyond 3 months are not recommended, and patients with progressive disease or poor performance status, either at the outset or at completion of systemic or local therapy, they do not benefit so much. So the overall survival benefit, at the moment we are assuming that it is there in limited stage disease because the data to refute it is not too much. But the MRI surveillance trial has refuted the role of PCI to gain overall survival. The neurocognitive decline attributed to PCI is not certain, but we may potentially reduce it with approaches such as hippocampal avoidance, use of memantine, close MRI surveillance, and maybe offer early SRS. The role of PCI in the setting of immunotherapy is uncertain still, and there is no definite role at present in non-small cell lung cancers or extrapulmonary small cell cancers. So my recommendations from the data that I have reviewed, you should consider brain imaging at baseline and at completion of systemic therapy, even for limited stage. All cranial RT, whether it is therapeutic or prophylactic, should include cognitive assessments at baseline and follow-up. For limited stage, PCI should be considered standard therapy in fit patients till we have strong data in the future to refute this. The dose standard is 25 gray in 10 fractions. For extensive stage, PCI should be considered based on several factors. You may consider omission in elderly patients, those who have poor performance status, pre-existing neurocognitive decline, but even in these patients, we should ensure regular MRI surveillance. Dose, as I said, 25 in 10 in some low performance status extensive stage patients, you may offer 20 in 5. You should ideally start within 4 to 6 weeks, within 60 days at least, if the patient has a complete response or a good partial response after the acute toxicity has resolved. Patients with progressive disease typically would not benefit. There are investigational methods to reduce PCI toxicity. You may consider them if you have the resources, but data so far for PCI in particular is lacking. And immunotherapy trials, even as a radiation oncologist, you should watch out for brain metastasis incidence in these trials to define the role of PCI in this setting. Thank you. So I'd welcome any questions that are there.
Thank you so much, ma'am. As it was expected that the controversy, I think a lot of controversies you have cleared so well, and they are beautifully explained. There are a couple of questions in the chat box. If you allow me, I can read one after another.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The first question is from Dr. Prabhakar. Can you please explain the dose constraint for hippocampus?
Okay, so one, we should learn how to draw hippocampus. There are RTOG guidelines available for that. You need an MRI fusion with your planning CT scan to be able to draw it. It is a horse-shaped structure. And after you draw the hippocampus, you give a 5 millimeter PRV margin to that. The constraint is typically given to the hippocampus proper. So you give the constraint at about Dmax of 15 gray or so to your hippocampal volume and a mean dose of 6 to 9 gray. Some studies have also achieved mean doses of less than 6 gray, but for starting, even if you're able to achieve 9 gray, you should be okay. Usually there is no constraint given for the PRV because that is a transition volume. I'll just share my screen once more.
And ma'am, meanwhile, can you please just mention in short the imaging protocol when someone is willing to contour the hippocampus? Because many institutes for radiation planning for whole brain irradiation, sometimes they take just 5 millimeter cuts. So can you please throw some light on that? So
if you have to draw the imaging, draw the hippocampus, you should ask your MRI technician to take a volumetric scan and to give you as thin cuts as possible. We typically ask for 1 millimeter axial cuts with 0 gap between the cuts. So there should be no missing data between two slices. If they are unable to give you 1 millimeter, even 2 millimeter is okay. Thicker than 2 millimeter, you will be extrapolating a lot. So exact delineation and application of constraints to that volume may not be proper.
And ma'am, any recommendation for the planning CT scan and the slice thickness, interslice distance?
Yeah. So typically when we have our CT simulators, we take a helical CT. And the typical slice thickness that most departments use is 2.5 to 3 millimeters. And there is an option for reconstruction of these images to thinner sections at the time of your simulation as well. So you can acquire 3 millimeter slice thickness, but if you have a provision of reconstruction to 1 to 2 millimeters, that is what you should prefer. There is no point in having an MRI which is 1 millimeter thickness and a CT which is 3 millimeter or 5 millimeter thickness. So there should be a concordance between these two. 5 millimeter, if you are attempting hippocampal sparing, it is not recommended. If you can't do that, then you can't do hippocampal sparing also. The ideal would be 1 to 2 millimeter for each of those. And you need a T2 axial ideally for contouring your hippocampus. Although T1 contrast is also availability of that is preferred because that is where you may need to mark your tumor, especially if you're doing it for the whole brain setting in the presence of brain metastasis. So there is about 8 to 10% incidence of brain metastasis in the hippocampus across all series. So you should never be sparing hippocampus if there is a lesion in contact with hippocampus or if it is within the hippocampus, although the probability is low. I hope I've answered that.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. The next question from Dr. VMJ. What was the rationale behind authors choosing to exclude early CNS failures in the EORTC trial? If they are trying to exclude patients who may have had micromets prior to treatment itself, would it not have been better to have a proper protocol for brain imaging? I'm not sure I understand the rationale behind their decision to do so. Can you please clarify this?
So, as I said earlier, Ben Slotman's initial trial came in 2007. Then this trial by Takahashi, the Japanese trial, the final results were published in 2017, but it was presented in a conference in 2015. So at that time, they refuted the role of PCI if MRI surveillance was present. And they said that Ben Slotman's trial was faulty in the sense that they did not do MRI. So they were treating actually micrometastasis, which would have been picked up on MRI, but they missed them and they attributed PCI to that improvement in survival, although they were treating brain metastasis and achieving survival with whole brain radiation for brain mets. So based on that, these people again went back and reanalyzed their data. They said if there are brain metastasis, patients should develop progression in at least 2 months. So if you exclude those patients who had early CNS failures, you have excluded that population who had asymptomatic brain metastasis of any relevance. So you take only the cohort of patients who had a much lesser likelihood of having brain metastasis at the outset. So the results could be more comparable to Takahashi's cohort of patients.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question from Dr. Basalat. Should MR surveillance be done with normal or double contrast, 1.5 Tesla or 3 Tesla, in extensive stage small cell lung cancer on MR surveillance protocol?
So the standard of brain imaging is on 3 Tesla now. 1.5 Tesla is done only if 3 Tesla is not available. Unlike low dose CT in lung where you use lesser slice thickness, lesser radiation, there is no such difference when you're doing MRI surveillance as a protocol versus MRI for a symptomatic disease. There is no need to give double contrast. Normal gadolinium contrast at 1.5 ml per kg suffices. But if 3 Tesla is available, you should go for it. Otherwise, whatever is available, that should be applied uniformly to all your patients. It should not be like some of your patients are getting surveilled on 3 Tesla, some are getting surveilled on lesser sensitivity.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Sushil has a question. In a patient with limited stage disease with no brain mets in baseline MRI, can we avoid PCI since there is no OS benefit as per meta-analysis?
for limited stage disease, the meta-analysis are not very clear on that answer. We do not have a large trial which addresses that issue. We do not have a good meta-analysis that addresses that issue specifically. For extensive stage, yes, if patient is understanding if they are willing for MRI surveillance every 3 months, that is an option that you can offer them. But for limited stage, at the moment, the data is not ripe to recommend MRI surveillance, only for patients in which you would anyway hesitate to offer radiation. Patient is 73 years, has dementia, has already a cardiovascular thing going on. That is a patient, even in the presence of limited stage, where I would desist from offering PCI, because I know the gain with PCI is still only 2 months or 3 months. It is not a huge gain for that patient. So you may see the problems that your treatment may give them, and then try to maybe opt to withhold that treatment.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ajit Gandhi has shared excellent presentation, ma'am, very comprehensive and helpful as well as always. Thank you, Dr. Ajit, for your nice comments. And Dr. iPhone, I don't know the name. Ma'am, can you please elaborate on the timing of PCI in limited stage disease, and can it be given with ongoing systemic therapy?
Okay, so one thing is very clear, that PCI should be offered to patients after you have assessed response to initial therapy. So for limited stage patients, the standard protocol is that you start systemic therapy and you give thoracic radiation therapy either with the first cycle or at least at the time of the second cycle, and patients are given typically 4 cycles of chemotherapy. So at the end of that chemotherapy, maybe 4 weeks from whatever your last therapy is, when you complete that, you do a response assessment, and based on that response assessment, if there is no brain lesion, then you offer PCI. Typically, in the previous retrospective data results, PCI given within 60 days is beneficial. All the trial data suggests that if it is given by 6 weeks, when the acute toxicity of your systemic and local treatment has settled, if you give it then, it's a 10-day treatment, 2-week treatment. So if the patients are doing it in continuity with the rest of the treatment, it helps them also. But concurrent PCI with systemic therapy has higher toxicity. It is to be avoided.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Dr. Ajit Gandhi has a question, just to the track question, ma'am, just of the track. Your current recommendation for local RT in extensive stage disease?
Now, thoracic radiation is recommended for patients who have a good response to systemic therapy. Patients who do not have any other sites of metastasis which are active or progressing, who have residual disease or even complete response, these are the patients who would benefit with addition of 30 Gray in 10 fractions to the local disease. There is some conflict in whether CR patients should be offered this or not, but at the moment, I think the data is that patients who are controlled systemically should be offered.
And ma'am, do you recommend it for stable disease as well?
For stable disease, yes, I would recommend that.
Thank you, ma'am. And Dr. Gandhi has additional question in relation to that. Add concurrent chemotherapy also?
Concurrent chemotherapy with PCI, no.
With thoracic RT?
Thoracic RT, usually like I said, you assess your response to systemic therapy and then offer RT as consolidation. So with 3 Gray per fraction, I would desist from offering concurrent chemotherapy. I would do it at the end of it. Again, this is not a long treatment of 6 weeks. This is a 2-week treatment. So it can easily be scheduled at the end of systemic treatment. Systemic treatment in extensive stage would typically be 6 cycles of EP, or in the current situation, atezolizumab. Whether atezolizumab can be given concurrent or not, that is still unaddressed. Probably it is safe. With durvalumab, we know that it is safe when you're giving it in non-small cell lung cancers. So as maintenance, when you're giving atezo, if you give PCI, it should be fine. But data is not there, so we don't have a lot of information on that as well.
And ma'am, for PCI in extensive disease, the dose and whether do you give it with concurrent chemotherapy?
PCI in extensive stage, again, If possible, 25/10. If the patient has mobility issues, poor performance status, then you can cut down the schedule to 1 week where you give 4 gray per fraction, total 20 gray. Concurrent again, no. Concurrent chemotherapy should not be given with a prophylactic treatment.
Thank you, ma'am. Just one question, if you allow me, please, from my end.
Dodul, I have a question.
Dr. Arman, please. Ma'am, we have Dr. Arman from Bangladesh. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Shikha Goel, ma'am, for your nice and elaborated presentation. Actually, definitely, it will help us a lot. So my already I have lots of questions, but already all question has discussed in your discussion. But just one question that after PCI, if a patient developed brain metastasis after 2 or 3 months, then should we go for palliative brain radiotherapy again?
If your patient is controlled systemically, if there are no other systemic meds, you can offer focal radiation to the site of brain metastasis if it is limited. If your patient has pleural brain metastasis after PCI, you will have to consider other factors. If the performance status is good, you may consider again a longer course, but limited to the volume of metastasis only. I would not recommend giving whole brain radiation again within 2 or 3 months of primary treatment. First, your primary treatment was ineffective. So giving more treatment like that may not be sufficient. A single lesion may escape the effect. You may consolidate dose there because you're not giving a curative dose for a gross disease in that situation. But whole brain radiation, definitely not so soon.
Understand.
Ma'am, Dr. Ajit has another question, like, do you give thoracic RT in extensive disease, and do we simultaneously give PCI during the same sitting, or we sequence it? What is your practice?
It can be given concurrently, I feel. I don't have strong data to support this, but since these are mutually exclusive volumes, there is no systemic component to either of them. If your patient is in good performance status, young patient who you feel can withstand the minor side effects of either treatment, you can offer them together.
Ma'am, just one question from my end, just to have some understanding. Brain being low alpha by beta, and we chose to give higher fractions and size during PCI. Any rationale behind that?
See, all of this has been empirical. The dose of 25/10 is not very high. It is less than 3 gray, and it is still a convenient time schedule. So if you are giving 13/15, ideally it should show it to have a similar response. But the retrospective data actually showed results in favor of 25/10. So the world has stuck to that schedule. But if you are not able to give, or if you are unwilling to give hypofractionated because of this concern of radiobiology, giving a protracted course may not harm. I mean, in my previous institution, we were actually not doing hypofractionation when we were doing PCI. We were actually giving 30 gray in 15 fractions there. Although most of these patients did not come to us for long-term follow-up because they were following up with medical oncologists, but they tolerated it well. Long-term, I'm not sure if they fared better or worse.
So, given the chance, what practice would you like to follow? Like, would you like to follow 13/15 or 25/10?
See, I would like to stick to what has the most data. At the moment, if given a chance, I would like to stick to 25/10. It has stood the test of time. It is convenient. And in a low resource setting, you would want to stick to a smaller schedule. In COVID times, probably people would want it even more constricted. Even 20/5 may be acceptable. For lymphomas also, 3 gray per fraction, 4 gray per fraction schedules are coming in from big institutions. So I guess in the current scenario, if PCI has to be offered, even 20/5 may be okay, even for limited stage, rather than not offering it.
Any reason in difference of this treatment protocol, like when we are delivering radical radiation for limited stage disease, we are trying to move ahead with hyperfractionation twice daily and high dose. But when it's coming about brain, we are trying to do hypofractionation. It may be moderate hypofractionation, but this is same disease having similar tumor cells, but with different dose fractionation type.
See, I feel this practice is not guided by evidence. It is guided by what has happened and what kind of results it gave us. Thinking logically, hyperfractionation should apply as well in brain as it did in thorax. Tolerance-wise, brain tissue as such, apart from the memory impact, the brain tissue does tolerate higher dose per fraction compared to if you're treating large volumes in thorax, if your lesion is large and you're addressing lymph nodes as well as pulmonary disease. So there may be a gain with respect to toxicity in the local area with hyperfractionation in lung. But there is no true rationale to doing it differently for two sites within the same patient for the same disease. I agree with you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you once again.
For having me.
And have a very nice weekend. So good night, ma'am, and good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Have a good weekend. Good Sunday. Happy Sunday.
You too. Bye.
Bye, ma'am.